Okay, it's recording now.
Cool.
All right, Mike, you're the second guest on my show. Hopefully it goes better than the first one. But you were a little more chill than the first person I had on. The first person I had on was pretty intense and hostile.
I didn't watch that. It looked like a lot. But yeah, I know what you're talking about, the abortion issue. Yeah, that seemed like it got heated. I do appreciate you having me on. I don't know where you want to start. I am persistent. But I think, I said this in one of the videos I made. I don't think this is an easy thing to talk about on Twitter.
No.
I think stuff gets messy and lost. I think you and I both get impatient online. I think
so. I think Twitter brings it the worst in everybody, to be honest.
Yeah, and I don't really think you and I are going to walk away from this having like our minds changed fundamentally, but I still think they're good conversations to have. And like I think I said somewhere online to you, this is a similar conversation I've had even with my childhood pastor recently. And I just think they're healthy conversations to have. Yeah, I don't really expect I'm not going to hound you till you change your mind or admit something. I'm not expecting to get anything out of this conversation like that. I want it to go state your 2 cents. I'll state my 2 cents. I think these are just important to put out there for people thinking about these things to hear and consider.
All right. So first of all, why don't you just tell people our little exchange, just David, how this all got started between you and me? I don't even know anymore.
Well, I want to talk to you specifically about the comments that you make about pretty much anything related to LGBTQ issues. I think that there is a lot there to talk about. I know you've stated recently that you don't think there is, and I was very excited when you shared the verse from Corinthians, if I was going to pull it up. But that's exactly...
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10 is the one I shared with you.
Okay. So that's exactly one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you.
Okay.
That in relation to other things I've heard you mention recently while having conversations with like Aaron Ra or Peter from Beyond Belief, if I'm remembering the show name correctly. But I just think there's a lot there to discuss. I don't know what I was thinking. In some of the conversations you've had recently, I've seen people be like, look, let's all agree to common terms. And then I feel like you maybe realized a little bit in the conversation that you weren't looking at what they were saying from exactly the same perspective. And you felt like, well, then I don't want to be backed into that corner. So I don't really want to do that. Here, I don't really think that's healthy to be like, Rob, agree to this. And then like, I'm not going to try to get you on anything like 10 minutes down the road. I just thought it's probably healthier to skip all that. And I can, whenever you are comfortable with me doing so, I don't know if you wanted to say anything from your perspective, but I just figured I would state my case. I don't really want to like hold your hand through a series of agreements that I feel like I've carefully laid out to be like, aha.
I mean, well, we're both adults. We don't have to agree with anything we don't want to agree with.
I know, but I did see that. I think in almost every conversation you had, they were like, well, let's agree to common terms. And then, I get it. I get understanding being on the same page to a point, but then I always saw it used at the end of the call to sort of like, I just seem to frustrate people. So I figured I would skip that. Do you want me just to state my case in terms of what I think about that section of Corinthians and some of the impact that it has on language around LGBTQ things? Okay. So something I've heard you talk about recently.
Just to introduce yourself for a second. So just tell because this will be on YouTube. So just tell the audience, our online audience, to when they see it, just who you are, what you're about. That kind of thing.
Well, I don't have a lot to hawk. I don't really do this in any sort of
let's introduce yourself.
Capacity, but
your name is obviously not Brain Dead Faith.
No. Brain Dead Faith is a reference to William Lane Craig. My name is Mike. yeah, you and I talked about where brand dead faith came from. That was a term he applied to someone named Apologia, which I thought was rather
Wait a
cruel.
second. Wait a second. Hold on a second. You're saying that Apologia, the studio, is that what that's what William Lane Craig was William Lane Craig was referring to?
Do you know Apologia, the YouTuber?
This like Jeff Durbin.
No.
I'm
Paul.
thinking studio.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's a play. I think it's a play on the same.
Sort of like a
His name is
tongue-in-cheek.
Paul. Yeah, Paulo Gia.
Oh yeah, I know who that is. Yeah.
You've seen him on YouTube, yeah. So
Yeah.
he had recorded a message to William Lane Craig about his sort of deconversion process.
Hmm.
He was very active. He was a youth pastor for a long time, and very dedicated. His whole life fell apart. Caused him to get a divorce. Lost for a period of time. Wasn't able to see his kids because the church kind of cut him off. It was pretty brutal. Anyways, he had talked about what that was like to go through that, and he's in a better place now with his children. He can see them again, but it's a hell of a ride. He also was diagnosed with cancer around that time and almost died.
Yeah, I'm sure the stress had a big effect on that.
Yeah. People in the church were like, "Oh, you got cancer because you left God. That's why that's happening." There's a lot of bad stuff that happened.
To be honest, as a Christian, I hate it when people pull that kind of crap.
No, it's nuts. I mean, people get cancer. Believers, non-believers.
Doesn't irrespective of your worldview, people get cancer.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, that had come up once with William Lane Craig. A video was played for him, and the username that I grabbed was just his response to Paul's upbringing, and I thought that was very cruel. So it stuck out to me. But yeah, my name is Mike. I used to sort of engage with people like William Lane Craig and Frank Turek, Gary Habermas, Mike Lacona on my personal account.
What's your philosophy or position? Are you agnostic, atheist, theist? Where you?
Well, I guess I do like the way Bart Ehrman talks about sort of this belief. As a human being, I can't definitively say that there never has been or there isn't in some corner outside of the observable universe something we would describe as God or godlike or gods. So I guess in that sense, sure, I suppose that's a question I would remain agnostic on. But when it comes to specific organized religions, I'm very atheistic. I don't subscribe to any of them. But probably a conversation for a different time. But I have my reasons for not believing in religions.
I respect you're free to believe whatever you want. I'm not going to knock you for your position.
And I know that sometimes you get into it with people about being an affirmative. I mean, yeah, I am making an affirmative case about every organized religion that I'm personally aware of, Christianity included, of course.
No, but I mean, I'm just asking because it helps me and others to know where you're coming from. That's all.
Yeah. So should I keep talking? Sorry, I'm rambling. I'm not really good at introducing myself. Okay, so the reason I wanted to talk was you'd mentioned something recently. I think in your talk, maybe with Peter, but I think I've heard you mention it a couple of times and I've heard obviously every apologeticist that I could think of talk about elements of the Bible that are descriptive and not prescriptive. That's a pretty important.
There is a difference. It's called context. I mean, that's how you separate. Like, for example, if I said my cell phone cost me an arm and a leg, you know that I'm not literally saying that my cell phone cost me a limb.
Yes. And I agree. Yeah, for sure. There's obviously descriptive and elements of the Bible that aren't meant to be prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that applied, of course, when, difficult subjects come up, like, an obvious one like slavery. There are elements of the Bible that discuss slavery. You and I have talked about that outside of, obviously, there are.
And it's in my book too. Which will be my target date. Publishing my book will be somewhere mid to late March. So I do cover the slavery thing too. So
right. So I've heard that.
Can't be avoided.
Yeah. No. I mean, it bothers me when people try to gloss over it. I don't like.
I definitely don't like it. Over it. It has to be addressed.
Yeah, and but even admitting that it has to be addressed, I can't even count the number of times I've heard Frank Turek be corrected about the way in which he describes slavery in the Bible as a kind of indebted servitude doesn't
Well, for
apply to
Hebrew,
children.
for Hebrews,
For-
it was,
Yeah,
but that only
but to
for
no one
Hebrews.
else. Yeah.
Mhm.
If you're a woman, you're shit out of luck.
Yeah.
If you're a
Yeah.
child born to a woman that is a slave, you're going to die a slave.
You
So
know
it
that
does bother me.
pretty much every nation on earth was practicing slavery around that time, right? Not to justify
But
it, I'm just saying.
yeah, no, it's certainly so.
I mean, the fact that Israel was in slavery to Egypt for 400
mhm,
years.
yeah.
400
So
years.
yeah. So, anyways, I concur that
Mhm,
it is good that the church has shifted,
mhm.
or followers of these religious texts have, however you want to describe it. Most 90% of followers of Christianity would no longer say this justifies slavery. But I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think you and I would disagree that there's 1800 years of religious text history for Christianity that text probably was used pretty aggressively to justify the act of
Yeah,
slavery.
I mean, Jesuits used certain parts of the Bible like that to justify slavery of black people. So,
Yeah, so it's a very recent shift, I think, in the followers of
but I do think
this
that
religion.
slavery was still much different in the Bible times than say slave owner. I mean, even the slave, and even pretty much everyone, even black owned blade slave, like whites owned whites owned blacks, like everyone owned every kind of race too for a while.
I mean, the primary driver of it not being race, perhaps it being class or nationality.
Oh yeah, class was the biggest one.
Sure, but I mean, it doesn't. I mean, yeah, I agree. It doesn't really. It's half a dozen one way, 60 the other. Like it sounds pretty brutal. It sounds
Hmm.
dehumanizing. It strips you of your
Oh, for
ability to
sure.
be free. So, for sure. But I mean, I think you and I can both agree that these elements of the Old Testament and the New Testament, unfortunately, were used to justify certain abhorrent actions around slavery or women's suffrage or civil
Yeah.
rights or a whole host of things that keep falling away
Hmm.
for
Yeah,
the better, because I don't think
you're aware that it was actually Caucasian Christians actually that got slavery abolished in Europe.
against other more conservative Christians who didn't. Yes, I mean that's always. I mean we had a civil war here in the States over Christians in the North, and well, a whole host of religious beliefs in the North that didn't. That's a complicated subject, but for sure, I'm not saying that there was a bunch of just straight up atheists in the North. I don't think Lincoln was an atheist or that whole political situation. But anyways, what I am saying though is that there are elements of the Bible that the church will, rightfully so, step away from. The church would be dead by now if, for example, it never gave up. Bless you. The
Thank you.
church would be dead by now if um, they refused to let go of the idea that they were justified in the 1600s burning 60,000 redheads because Judas
Oh,
was
for
a
sure.
redhead, because the devil had red hair. Like, that's an unimaginable act of hate and cruelty. And if we jumped into a time machine, we would be throwing ourselves into like just mass insanity. I mean, that's unimaginable, that level of like just normalized hatred
Hmm.
to tie a person with red hair on a stake and burn them alive because you think the Bible says so. Rightfully so, the church has, to survived, moved far beyond that practice, which they were pretty fucking serious about. I mean, it takes a lot of
Oh,
follow through to burn someone alive and then say, let's do it again another 59,000 times. So, what I'm
yeah.
trying to say is that there's
Just
a
for the
lot of
color of their hair. So
what's
the
that
60,000 people were burned just alive just because they're the color of their hair.
in Europe? Yeah, this is
That's
before the
crazy.
Catholic split. So, it's a horrible element of this last 2,000 years, people have done some bad stuff and used religious text, including the Bible, to justify it, but including other religious texts. I mean, people have their They're religious texts that they point to carry out actions they want to carry out. So my point
Well, I
being,
mean, you get about 100 million Muslims who would actually do jihad at a drop of a hat because it's literally in their text.
well, we could talk about that. I think that number's, that's probably a conversation for a different time. I think that language is a little bit, you got to be careful with what you say about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, according to stats, I'm just going by stats, but I mean, stats aren't always right either. So,
yeah, I just am, I'm old enough to remember the way that conservatives in this country reacted after 9/11, and I'm old enough to remember the way even people on the left, like Sam Harris, who I think is a lunatic, reacted. I think that type of language can be dangerous. So, anyways, I'm taking the long way around of trying to lay the groundwork for, rightfully so, the church has to survive, and because it is just unavoidably immoral to be a slave owner, to burn redheads at the stake just because they're redheads, all these things, it is immoral to deny women any rights within society outside of just being chattel. These things have fallen away, and they have become, when a person like myself, who is not a believer in these texts, points at them and says, these are not really great elements of the Bible, and they have been used to do not great things. Rightfully so, I think Christians point out that those are descriptive elements, not prescriptive elements. The reason I'm saying all this is it is, in my mind, impossible that 200 years from now, in the same way that you or I would talk about the diehard Christians that stood around and chanted and cheered when a redhead was burned alive at the stake in 1600s Europe, those aren't people carrying out the word of Jesus. That's immense cruelty. And in the same way, 200 years from now, there is not a snowball's chance in hell that people will look at the words used to describe trans people or gay people by largely evangelicals and say that is deeply immoral, that is wrong. Those elements that Paul or other elements of the Old Testament where they mentioned lying with a man or dressing like a woman if you were a man, they were descriptive. They weren't prescriptive. They will have to be that. Society will move on from that being a justifiable thing to hold on to. The church will die if it does not let that go, just like it would have died if it never let women gaining the right to vote. If that was a very, very heated issue, it destroyed the family dynamic, according to evangelicals at the time. They were wildly fundamental to it or opposed to it. The civil rights movement. I don't know if you ever looked at the stats during Martin Luther King's marches for civil rights. Roughly 83% of white evangelicals thought he was a traitor to his country. I don't know if you're aware of what we legally would do to traitors, but it was a very tongue-in-cheek way of saying we should kill that guy. He described every civil rights march as a race riot, a white hating. I mean, basically the language that we use to describe BLM marches today. You can go look at newspaper clippings of white evangelicals at the time of the civil rights. These things die in order for the church to survive. They have to die in order for Jesus's word, the good parts of it, to survive. They have to become descriptive. If they do not let go the idea that they are prescriptive, you're killing the church. It won't survive it. So that's my 2 cents. I think there are elements of the Bible that people can point to say that what I'm saying is moral about LGBTQ people, that they're an abomination or that they are destined for hell, and a lot of other rather upsetting language. People somehow infer from this that they have a right to call people like this repulsive, disgusting.
Well, I think what they do is repulsive and disgusting, but
It's not.
I have the same contention for people who practice any kind of sexual deviation from the one man, one woman, including multiple sexual partners of this opposite sex. So
That's fine. But I don't know if you're aware, here in the States, hate crimes against LGBTQ people has been on the rise pretty aggressively. I can find a clip of Pat Robertson from 2005-ish. Pat Robertson, very conservative, very conservative nut job, right? Like he's kind of out there.
Oh, for sure.
I could find a clip of him in 2005 saying, "Oh, yeah, sure. I don't really think it's outside of the question of like believability that a female soul can be born into a male body. That that happens. I know people like that."
What? I didn't hear that crap. That's
now,
nuts.
10 years later, that tide has turned. And I can find clips of Pat Robertson shortly before his death saying these people are disgusting. You got to keep them away from your kids. They're freaks. They shouldn't be allowed to be in office. This is why God hates us. That has not always been the case. This is a recent boogeyman that is like the soup of the day. Fucking, this is the person to pick on.
Right. Yeah.
If Pat Robertson in 2005 is like,
but in my country, in Canada, the LGBT is the most protected group in the country, like far and away. Like if you go after the LGBT, like you can lose your livelihood, lose your job. You can be in jail. You get a fine. Like that. Like it's like you can't touch the LGBT in Canada.
Good. I mean, they've had a pretty rough run. Good. I mean, yeah, people thought it was overstepping when the Civil Rights Act passed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone should go after anyone for any kind of harm whatsoever. But I mean, I think they're a little overprotected. Like, I mean, just like there are someone, and like I'll give you an example. I know of someone who was trans. Well, I guess it's part of that community, and the teacher made a comment to him in text, and then he made it public, and she lost her job just because she made I think she said like why are you doing it? Like you know better than this, something like that, and she lost her job just for making that comment.
Well, I don't know the details of that, but if it escalated, I can see that being.
Do you think it's justified that someone loses her job just because they said you know better than what you're doing?
Well,
that's it. That's all she said.
Well, come on, Rob. I'm sure that in private this escalated, and it was like, look, we got to let you go. We can't have this playing out in the school. This is going to get really ugly.
Yeah,
really
it's
fast.
a PR. It's because it's all about it's a PR, right? Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if you have kids, but things, when you start to have an incident at school with parents involved. But yeah, I appreciate. Well, I appreciate looking at things from like a historical perspective, and I think a lot of people would have said right after the Civil Rights Act passed here in the States, like some of the laws that protected people from any level of open discrimination was overstepping. And one thing I don't think, this is something I heard my childhood pastor talk about, and it wasn't something that I really realized was a bit of a disconnect, because I would always hear him during Pride Month. He basically would spend every Sunday kind of railing against all things Pride Month. And he would say it is counterproductive. And he and I had a long talk. And to his credit, he held an emergency isn't the right, a middle of the week sermon where after he and I talked, he walked it back. I was very surprised. He's a very conservative guy.
What did he walk back?
We'll get to that in one second. I'll tell you what he walked back, because I do think it's to his credit. It's one of the reasons that I do enjoy talking to him is I wouldn't expect a lot of people to walk back some of the things they said. But one of the things I did hear him say on the Sunday service was that, these people, this community, first they just wanted to, have the same rights as us. But now they want more rights than we have, more protections. And I pointed out to him in the conversation.
That's definitely the case in Canada, but go ahead.
Well, here in the States, it's not. I'm not familiar with all the laws in Canada, but here in the States, I think that a lot of evangelicals assume LGBTQ protections fall under the Civil Rights Act, right? I can't, as an employer, look someone in the face and say, you're a Jesus freak. I'm not hiring you. I am effed if I do that. I can have internal reasons where I'm uncomfortable with somebody because maybe they are religiously extreme in a way that I think just isn't in line with like my work. But I literally I am not allowed to say that out loud and you understand the impact that it can have to normalize the ability to say out loud.
What state do you
you're
live
a Christian? Michigan. I'm in the Midwest.
Oh, okay. So not too far from me then.
Oh, okay.
I'm
I didn't know
hour
the
west of
time
Toronto.
zone.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
We're
not
both
far.
in Eastern Standard Time now.
Yeah, Eastern Standard Time. Yeah, I was curious when we said we would talk. I didn't know what time zone you were, but when you sent Eastern Standard, I was like, oh, good. But I think you can appreciate the way that things would be normalized if I could, and everyone else could say, I'm not going to hire you. You're a Christian. I'm not going to hire you because you're a black guy. If you can say those things out loud,
Mhm.
that creates a very normalized, insane environment. LGBTQ people are not protected under the Civil Rights Act. There are only 13 states in the United States that have any legislation that goes above and beyond basically religious discrimination, because in the rest of the states, only 13 protect LGBTQ people in anywhere the range of the civil rights that I enjoy with my religious freedoms or my sexual orientation, etc. All that stuff that is included in civil rights does not apply to trans people. So
But
in the rest of all the,
do you think in the states that doesn't apply, do you think that they're like demonstrably targeted?
yes, no, I mean, people like Mike Pence built their career on passing legislation that made sure religious freedom legislation that said you can literally look a person in the face at a restaurant that you think is LGBTQ, falls under
Seriously?
some umbrella, and you can say, I don't want to serve
Arrest.
your kind here. I mean,
You can
you're
arrest.
aware. Arrest? No, you could say I don't serve your kind here. You can say I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
going to hire
So
you.
you can deny employment and service.
You can deny unemployment, service, higher education, access to living. You can say I'm not going to rent to you. I'm sure you're familiar with the freaking cake lady that was here in the United States. That like those protections that religious institutions. My childhood pastor as a Christian will never probably face any type of. He will never go to a job interview and say you're a Jesus freak. I'm not going to hire you. If he did, he'd have serious legal recourse. As a trans individual, they could have a landlord say, I don't give apartments to freaks like you because you're trans. Nothing they can do legally. They can go to apply to college, get in, show up on orientation, and be told you're trans. We don't want you around here. Be kicked out. No legal recourse. There's only 13 states out of all the country, all the United States, that even begin to protect LGBTQ people. So the only reason I bring that up is because I kept hearing during those Sunday services during Pride Month language from my pastor kind of assuming that these people already were afforded the same protections that my pastor can appreciate and benefit from within society from not being openly discriminated against. So what are your thoughts on that? That here in the States, that is not the case, that there is a lot of states that can go pretty much hog wild and say, we don't serve your kind here. And I can send you stats on this. There's a really fantastic source called, hold on, LGBTQ. It's called Interactive Map. This is from Freedom for All Americans. So there's a good stat that breaks down sort of like in real time the legislation within different states. I'm sure you have like similar resources there in Canada based on provinces, but yeah, it's not what I think people assume. I think people assume like, well, I turn on the TV and I see like trans people, so they have the same rights as us and they want more. They don't have the same rights as us. They can be openly discriminated against at a restaurant on a work break with like 5 of their friends. And that to me
Is that
is
typical
wrong.
or is it? It is wrong.
In
But
conservative states, oh, it's messy. Oh, no, hate crimes and discrimination offense, they're pretty intense. I mean, we have
common?
common enough to be a real problem. I mean,
Like that people would
like
be like sitting at gay people would be sitting at a restaurant with their buddies and they'd be getting harassed.
Yeah, in the
That
states,
happens
in
like
conservative states, yeah, man, like
happens,
it happens
that's not,
pretty frequently. It's not an uncommon scenario. I mean, if you're a openly gay person and you walk into a restaurant in, I don't know, anywhere in Texas besides Austin, you don't think you run a pretty high risk of getting verbal harassment, potentially getting followed, hurt.
Texas is probably the most overtly conservative state there is.
Even in the Midwest, I mean, it's not. We have a militia problem here in Michigan. I mean, there's some dark stuff that goes down. It's, I mean, if you ever Google the stats on hate crimes in the States, it's gone off in the last few decades. It's gone off. It's quite dangerous. I mean, you know, even with trans, all things trans now, parents in any conservative district freaking out over anyone that might fall even remotely into a category of trans, or someone that doesn't have a problem with the trans community, right? Hey, you have a rainbow in your classroom, causes a freak out. I mean, it's a very normalized environment of hostility, and these people don't have legal.
I've also read like numerous stories about conservatives who have been targeted with their families, like more known ones, like someone who would have as much clout as, say, Ben Shapiro. They'd be at a restaurant with their family. I'm not saying Ben, but just to someone who has as much clout or notoriety as him, right? Would be at a restaurant with their family, and they'd be targeted by the left. Some unhinged left-wing nut job or journalist would come in and just like sabotage their entire dinner just to harass them. And like this is pretty common in a lot of left-wing states too, man. Yeah. Just to bring some perspective, like I'm not saying that none of those things are acceptable.
No, and I don't. You know, look, I've seen Nick Fuentes. Is that how you say his name? I don't know if you're familiar with that guy, but he's an open Nazi.
Okay, that's not cool.
I just had dinner with Kanye West and Donald Trump. Used to be more cozy with Ben Shapiro, but now he will chase after him at conservative events and attack him from the right about how he's a coward because he won't openly say that, he won't agree with Nazi ideology. So
I know of conservatives who have literally moved. I mean, I think Ben Shapiro has done it a couple of times himself, just because his like being like completely like targeted when they're in public.
Well, full disclosure, I don't really have a problem with somebody like Ben Shapiro who spends his political capital and all his fame and fortune demonizing people and citing violence and what's his name?
How does he incite violence?
How does he incite violence? I mean, you have spent, what are we at? 30 minutes talking about the normalization of hate in a country like this throughout history, or use. I mean,
but I mean, like,
I don't know if you want to get into. I don't know if
even though Ben's a Jew, and like literally 6 million Jews have been wiped off the face of the earth because of one Nazi and his party.
Yeah. Yes.
You don't think
Ben
Ben
is an
Shapiro
interesting character.
Racism?
What's that? Oh, that he does. Like I just said, he receives. I've seen him get verbal pushback from the left. I've seen him get attacked very openly from the right, from right of his right. But Ben is an interesting character, and that he is openly Jewish. But just about every Christian I know listens to him or appreciates him in some capacity because
because of the abortion.
He will attack LGBTQ stuff, or he will go off on abortion stuff. I mean, in terms of Jewish law, abortions are fine.
So
you know what I mean?
Exactly. So obviously, Ben Shapiro and myself would be on the same side of the fence with the sexual abortion stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of practicing Jews. There's a whole range. There's no monolith for any religious organization, but generally speaking, abortion is an accepted element of Judaism. It is not. It doesn't have the same connotation that Christianity has applied to it. So Ben is sort of stepping into a lane that, if I were to be cynical, I would say is better for his bottom line. But if I was to be completely optimistic and say, no, he just genuinely believes that, fine. But he likes to say a lot of things that Christians agree with.
Yeah, and have you heard do you know of Jeff Durbin? Probably, right?
I don't know if I know who that is. Who's that?
He's one of the founders of Apologia Church.
Apologia. Yeah, what has he done recently? I might just not know him by name.
Well, he's also very on the front lines against abortion. He's one of his websites is called endabortionnow.com.
I think I have heard of that. Okay, so that's him.
Yeah, so he's had Ben on. and yeah, they got along quite handsomely because of the stuff that we've just mentioned, the abortion stuff and the trans stuff and the homosexual stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ben obviously needs to learn tact, but I mean, Ben knows that Ben is not known for his tact.
No, well, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to you. I don't really much appreciate Ben Shapiro, and I think he's.
I think he needs to be more gracious.
I just, every time I hear Ben Shapiro's name, I just think of the speech he gave at a college where he said, "I don't know why people are crying about global warming. If you have a house that's in the way of a hurricane, just sell it." And I think that about sums up the level of his intellectual rigor with certain subjects. I think he.
I wouldn't say that. Sometimes I just like, yeah, I think it goes could do a lack of compassion.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. I feel like we veered off track a bit, but what were you asking me about my childhood pastor? Oh, yes. So, okay. This, I think, might be a really
his retract. Yeah, you said he walked back something. That's what you're going to yeah.
This is, so I think you and I, I cover my perspective on how I think it's inevitable that certain elements, of Corinthians and stuff are going to become descriptive and not prescriptive. I think something else very important to consider, because I just saw you share a video of it, of a child psychiatrist talking about how no one is, assigned at birth a sex that they
no, that wasn't a psychiatrist. That was a medical doctor.
No, she's a child psychiatrist.
Oh, so she's an MD.
I think she's in psychology. I looked. I was like, is she a doctor outside of psychology? And I couldn't find anything that suggested she was.
Okay.
But I mean, it just sort of hit my ear like, this is probably a person that you see doctors sometimes, and it's like, oh, you have a doctor, like, I don't know, legal matters or something, but you're speaking as though you're sort of presenting yourself as though you are qualified to speak on actual medical interventions, like people would normally apply to a doctor. But this is what I talked about with my childhood pastor, because he was going on. He had said something in the closing. What bothered me most about it, I almost always listen to his service each Sunday. I'll stream it after the fact. I've had trouble doing it lately because there's been issues with Facebook, but on mobile. But I always listen. And in one of his closing prayers, what bothered me most was it was a closing prayer. It's one thing, I think, to do it during your during the service that you're giving, but it especially bothered me that this was everyone close your eyes, bow your head and pray. And in that prayer, he used, I'm going to paraphrase, but it was very close to, people that reject the identity that God has given them. It's an affront to God.
Okay.
Now, I think I'm aware through private conversations of several people sitting in that audience that feel that they would apply to that, their existence is an affront to God. They won't say it in that community because you can imagine that's not the most inviting situation to say, hey, you just called me an affront to God. I feel like I might be that. So that bothered me. And I talked to him very close. Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that I wanted to address with you, and it's kind of indicative of other things, but it seems like it's always, I won't say always, but it seems like when it comes to stuff when people rejecting the Bible or God or Jesus, that it's usually this: I don't want to do God's ways. I don't like God's standard of sexuality, and it seems to be about feelings. That's how I feel about the situation rather than the truth of the situation having it say over and above my feelings.
I don't know how, perhaps you've had more personal conversations with people that have been in the process of coming out as bi or gay.
No, but I mean,
trans.
regardless of whether someone's bi or straight or not, my point is that I feel like most people reject God in the Bible because they have feelings, and it seems like I want to live my life according to how I feel. That seems to be, to me, the biggest pushback against Christianity, in my opinion.
I mean, you know that joke about like describe a movie poorly?
No,
Well, anyways, it was like funny jokes about.
But anyways,
Like the Wizard of Oz is like a young girl from Kansas kills a witch and then like sets off to kill again or something. You know, like there's just a funny meme.
okay.
I can, you know, I mean, I think you could unfavorably say you want to do certain things sexually so you don't like Jesus. I think that is a way to describe probably the complicated sets of realities that go into I cannot deny this part of myself. It is who I've felt like since I've been 4. And if my community was,
what does the Bible say first? What does Jesus say first? Deny yourself. See, that is the crux of this entire conversation.
That's fine.
The refusal to deny yourself. That's what it all comes down to.
That is fine. I think you and I are fortunate as you know, our position within society is that the elements of ourselves we would have to deny in order to participate openly in Christianity and be welcomed by the church.
I have to deny. There's things that I have to deny every single day to walk with Jesus.
Yeah,
as part of being a Christian.
I don't think you or I.
Mike. If I didn't deny myself, I'd probably be sleeping around with who knows how many women. But I have to deny that because I walk with Jesus. That's just one example.
I've heard you say that a lot. I don't have to deny that much. Yeah, I don't feel.
We're different people.
I'm not fighting. I have
to deny that part of myself.
Sure. The point I'm trying to make is, you can deny things. You can have inner struggles, I think, but as who you are, as like a straight white man who wants to participate in Christian church, you're not openly effeminate in a way that is almost impossible to mask. You don't have to consciously think about how you speak or the way in which you move. If you walk into a church as somebody who has always been that way since you were 4, you're not going to be as welcomed. There are a certain set of complications that come with just the way you look, the way you speak. You have a target on your back in a way that isn't equal. I mean, I know within Christianity, there isn't a single person alive that wakes up and is not a sinner. Everyone's a sinner. There isn't a single day that goes by where someone is not a sinner in some capacity and needs Jesus to be saved.
I would say that's not. I would say my identity is son, but I do sin as a son on occasion. Yes.
But you and I would agree that, like, within Christianity, there's no one without sin that wakes up today.
No, of course. No,
every human is with sin. So, you know, for better or worse,
of course, absolutely.
There's somebody who, according to Christianity, lives with sin as a gay man and lives with sin for a whole set of other reasons. They both wake up every day, and according to Christianity, they are sinners. That's fine. You can be a sinner. I think you should be left alone to live your life. They can be a sinner. They should be left alone and shouldn't be susceptible to an increasing frequency of hate crime, discrimination, and legal non-protections. Is all I'm saying. But all that aside, the point of...
Hey, my question for you. Do I strike you as someone who's full of hate?
No. In the same way that I would be careful to answer my childhood pastor, there are topics that you discuss that are driven by hate. I think that's a very sensitive way to describe it in the moment. In the moment, people do not like that. But I don't think there's any denying. If we jumped into a time machine, you and I, and we jump back 200 years, there is 90% of the people that we're going to run into that are driven by a type of motivation we would just undeniably call hate towards races, towards women. It was just normal. And it was they would flip out if we said, hey, that's kind of hateful. It's not hateful. I'm just doing what God wants us in terms of the hierarchy of society or the household. But you and I would undeniably see that from today's perspective is, no, this is insane. This is a mass psychosis break.
Okay,
this is not normal.
Let me put the question another way. Do you hate bigotry?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of bigotry. Yeah, I would say in some cases I get quite hateful about what I can see carrying out in today's society.
So then it's good to be hateful of some things. That's called justice.
Yeah, I'm okay with hating some things for sure. I'm not above
Well,
hating certain actions.
you can't be a moral person without hating what's immoral and unjust.
The
And
question now is, what is moral?
our better question is, what is the epistemology of morality?
I mean,
Where
yes,
is that
I've heard your thought. Yes, this part, yeah, we can get into that. But to not get too sidetracked, I think you were clarifying about, yeah, just saying you're an affront to God from my pastor. So what we ended up talking about in response to that closing prayer, and the reason I brought up that video you just posted of the child psychiatrist who was talking about there is no such thing as being assigned a sex at birth is,
yeah, she said that it's assigned at conception and
yes,
and what's it, acknowledged at birth, not
yes. So you probably not, I'm not trying, if you can have a more complicated stance on this, that's fine. But my pastor agreed, like there is no one, babies aren't born. They're born the way God intends them to be born. And it is a bit of an affront to not, to deny that or change it. That's how my childhood pastor felt. I don't know if you have views different than that on.
I think we are born with what you are, what we were born with, had like your plumbing, your puts between your legs that we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, the way that God doesn't make a mistake with the way you're born, and you should
No, it
be
doesn't.
that. Okay. That's how my childhood pastor felt. So what we ended up talking about on the phone for quite a while was, I think so I gave an example of, there's a pretty surprising percentage of men in their 50s who begin to experience extreme abdominal pain. And they think, of course, that they're probably, they have like, they pulled something or,
Yeah,
so they go into the doctors.
Hernia or something like that, right?
A hernia. I mean, that's what most men think, having lived their entire life as a guy. They think, oh shit, I have a hernia situation. And they go into a doctor, and you know what they find? That they're experiencing menopause. They have ovaries, and they're experiencing menopause.
Men have ovaries.
Yes. Now, this is there is a category of the population all over the world, roughly 2%, about actually the exact same percentage of redheads in the world. So if you've ever met a redhead, you've more than likely met somebody who has no idea they're walking around with a more complicated set of biological markers than we would normally apply to, you're a boy, you're a girl.
Okay.
I don't think a lot of men in their late 40s.
Yeah, okay, I was going to say, I think sex is a little more complicated than hair color, but go on.
Yeah, well, I just mean in terms of, some people are like, well, 2%, what is that? And, I think it's a helpful marker of like the exact same children born with red hair are born what's called intersex, usually. Usually the umbrella term is intersex. And all that means.
I think I just said the math in my head, it could be wrong, but I think 2% is still about 160 million people, so it's still quite a few people.
Oh, it's massive. In the States alone, it's roughly 6 million. It's roughly 6 million people in the United States alone.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Right, currently. So in terms of worldwide population, I don't remember the numbers, but in the States, that's what bothers me so much when I hear Christians say that.
Well, I think we're about 8 billion people right now, so 2% would be 160 million if we are.
Well, you're better at math than I am. I'm not so fast with math, but what bothers me a lot is when I hear people cite Genesis and say, God made them man and woman. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's all there is. To me, that hits my ear in a way that freaks me out, because I know for a fact that there are 6 million people alone in just the United States that gets a little bit complicated. It's rare.
At least those what you're talking about are abnormalities, not an obvious indications of the fall of man. Like, if you think about it, we're living. We're all copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, right?
So you're saying the reason that we have
genetic breakdown,
redheads, and the reason that we have genetic breakdown is because of we're getting worse with each copy?
No, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it. I mean, like I said, we're all copies of copies of copies. The fact that we have these kind of anomalies once in a while is kind of not that.
Well, it's not a birth defect. A birth defect wouldn't fall anywhere near within the range of even 0.1%. 2% is not
Right.
an anomaly. 2% is
That's
way above and beyond. That's not like something that we like. It's not like someone born with Down syndrome or an anomaly within. That's a much smaller range of that percentage of children born each year that's off the charts. 2% is nowhere near a birth defect. That is not a birth defect. That seems to be baked into our. And it's not just with humans.
I'm saying that's a result of our fallen world. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that is a similar answer to what my pastor gave at the end of the day, but it still raises a complication of God made you the way that you are. I'm sure you're well aware of. Is pretty common in the 50s and 60s. You can watch a lot of documentaries on this about people coming of age as like a 40-year-old, realizing as their parents passed away that they actually were born with a sort of hybrid set of genitalia, and a decision was made. The doctor
What do you mean hybrid?
I mean intersex. I mean they had markers that were both.
Oh, interesting.
Born that way. Now, this was the 50s, and things were quite conservative. And it's pretty common for a doctor to say, well, look, we can either do a snip or we can do a stitch. It's up to you. And I would suggest not talking about it because of the stigma. Just don't tell them. They don't need to know. And these people would live their entire lives struggling with, I don't feel quite right. I don't feel like myself. Unaware that their parents had made a decision for them, and by the encouragement of their doctors, to make a decision for them about their sexual identity, and it would fuck them up in the head. I mean, that's difficult. There are all kinds of inner chemical things going on that help your body make these decisions, and you just stitch up something that your body is designed to have, even if it's not common. It's not common. 90% of the people are not born this way. But again, 6 million people living today in the United States are within this umbrella of intersex. And it's not always that. I'm not always saying that there are 6 million people with external hybrid, but internal, men with ovaries, visible external differences.
But I mean, you're a parent, right? Obviously, you'd want to shield your kids from stigma too.
Of course. No, I think I think the pressure comes from both ways. Society is not accepting of people that are different like this.
Yeah, I mean,
so a decision is made.
Can you imagine going to school with that kind of stigma? Man,
right.
That'd be horrible.
It would be horrible. And there is within that 2% falls the category of people that are born boys. Just very obviously they're a boy. There's nothing about them. There's no hybrid makeup of their body when they're born that is visible. They're a boy, straight through and through. Yeah. When they hit puberty, they do not develop hair in the same way that a boy would begin to develop hair, and they begin to develop breast. Now, that is a very difficult thing to go through as a young 13-year-old boy in high school. So a doctor can provide drugs to suppress those hormonal changes. I hear evangelicals say that is quite frowned upon. But I fully encourage a 13-year-old boy who does not want to go through the nightmare within society the way it currently is, not very accepting of that type of change, to just finish out high school as a boy. Make that decision later. Doesn't really feel like going through it at the moment. Would rather just blend in, be normal, have friends, study, finish school, and not be the boy that turned into a kind of girl halfway through high school. But these things happen. As God intended, if you are to subscribe to that ideology, if you were to leave that person alone, they would develop breast. And they would have a hybrid of body markers that we would normally attribute to just a boy or just a girl. And that is the way they were born. And so it is very dangerous in my mind to say these things about trans people, because unless you sit down and dig into their medical history, you just don't know. And you are putting a target on the back of people who just were fucking born this way and just do not want to be targeted, harassed, called freaks, excluded from being around kids because they're sexualized in some capacity or they're living in perversion. They are just born this way.
So you're saying it's not a choice?
Is it a choice to be
No, I
born
mean,
that
like,
way? To be
no,
born with a
no,
hybrid set
no,
of
no, not to,
genitalia?
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but you're saying like they can't choose their own sexual identity.
I'm trying to start somewhere where you and I can find common ground. Is there any
Yeah.
way for someone, as God has intended, is born with a set of internal and external markers that we would normally apply to either just a boy or just a girl who just want to live? Why should they live in is it moral to live in a society that says you are an abomination and you were just born that way? Is that right?
No, but I wouldn't call someone an abomination for how
How
they're
do you
born.
know? How do you know? How do you
No, I
know?
said I would. I wouldn't. I said I wouldn't.
Would you call them living in sexual perversion through their identity by dressing as a, you think they look like a guy, they dress like a girl. You don't know their makeup, you don't know their history.
No.
Is it right to put a target on their back?
No, of course not.
It is not. And I think what finally made my childhood pastor call that middle of the week meeting is talking about that 2% of people born that way. I was like, what if that was your daughter? You wish the best for your child when they're born. You don't want them to live in a world where they're targeted in any capacity for just who they are. That's always a fear. I mean, a child can be targeted because they're born with certain physical disabilities, and people can be brutal. But we thankfully live in a society where that's no longer the case. I don't know if you're aware, but the early church used to say if a child is born with disabilities, the moral thing to do. Who was this? Was this? Shit, I'm blanking on the early church father's name, but it was a big one. I wish I could remember. Was to kill it. Was to kill it after it was born.
After it
That
was
was
born.
after it was born, because they don't have. I mean, you're talking about like the 1400s. They have no way of telling before. But if the child's born and it has a disability, the moral thing to do was to kill it. Thankfully, we don't live in that world anymore, and most people with disabilities can go to school and not be absolutely terrorized. But unfortunately, we do still live in a society where if you were born and you look like you might be trans in some capacity, you're in for a world of hurt when you hit middle school, high school,
Sure.
and after school, because you shouldn't be allowed around kids. You shouldn't be allowed to run for office. You shouldn't be allowed to. I don't want to look at you. Your very existence is a sexual perversion against Jesus. They just are fucking born that way in some case, and you do not know their history, and they don't deserve it. It is wrong to say that about somebody, and it's I wish the Bible was more nuanced, but unfortunately, Genesis does not cover the nuance, the reality that there are 6 million people in the United States alone that do not fall in that category of man and a woman. Their life is more complicated than that.
Because it wasn't a reality back then. That's why.
No, it probably. I mean, look, I could say yes, Adam and Eve were the very first, but look.
No, but I mean, like.
Sure, but it is now.
Well, I mean, there wasn't 6 million people on the planet until.
What should they do, Rob? What should they do?
I don't know, man. It's a hard question.
I asked my pastor. I was like, who should they be allowed to marry? Who is a person that was born with a hybrid set of genetic markers externally? Who can they marry? In your eyes, it's not an abomination to God. Are they allowed to marry anybody? My pastor said maybe they shouldn't be allowed to marry anybody. That was his best answer.
Just be a eunuch.
Yeah, he mentioned eunuchs, and I thought, well, that's a personal choice, but
it is. But yeah,
I think the world is more complicated.
Who they should marry, I don't know. I don't know. That's a tough question, man.
How should they dress? How should a man dress who has that sort of in high school, he began to develop breast, and he takes certain medications to suppress that. Or he chooses not to, and he has breast.
It's funny you mentioned this because I remembered Turek said he had something about that, and he had it surgically removed when he was in the army or something like that.
Interesting. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's one of his talks. I don't remember. And then someone was talking about I think some biology lady was having a conversation with him about that kind of thing where like some men have this condition where they get with their breasts. I don't know what it is, but anyways, but Frank was like, do I have to have like a certain kind of NDA for this, or just kind of tongue-in-cheek?
Well, I mean, yeah, Frank is a funny guy. Well, I wish he was a little bit more sensitive to the subject, knowing that about his personal history. But
He's pretty sensitive, I think, when it comes to like talking to people. Like he's not a jerk. I don't find.
well, I mean, he's not a jerk.
I think he's
I
pretty.
think
What's the
he's a
word?
bumper sticker apologeticist in my view. But I
But I
can't
think,
forget last Christmas.
I think he's pretty kind in his discourse when he talks to people.
He is
Like during,
generally, for sure. I don't think
yeah,
he's not an angry guy, but I think he's very
no,
dismissive, and I think he undermines people's points a lot. But whatever. It's but I just can't forget. I think Christmas Eve. You'd think he'd be with family. I remember at 7:30 in the morning, he was ranting about trans people. It's like, it's Christmas Eve. What are you doing? Get off
on
Twitter.
Christmas Eve he was ranting about trans people. Yeah,
People were screenshotting like, dude, it's 7:30 in the morning. No, it wasn't Christmas Eve. I believe it was Christmas. And people were like,
oh,
aren't you supposed to be with your kids right now? Anyways, look, my point is so I
actually,
talked
Robbie
to
was
my
the
pastor.
opposite way, but that's funny. He's a different person.
What's that?
When he was still with us, Robbie, when there was one time where I think some stranger asked him, like, do you mind if I like talk to you about something about theology? And Robbie's like, it's Christmas. I just want to spend time with my family.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a funny time to be getting into that stuff. But
Yeah.
So
That was one rule he made for himself, was like he would never be working during the holidays. He would always be with family. Good rule to set for yourself.
that is nice. I wish I could afford to. Hopefully, I get there one day. Not have to work. Yeah. So I believe it was, asking my pastor about, what if that was your daughter born this way, as God intended, and the world was the way it was. I think something important to consider is,
It is.
I think you and I can agree, there is no way you get to a point where you can, as we discussed in the early 1600s, burn alive 60,000 redheads without the infrastructure of every Sunday at the very least. But the way the early church, and the modern church, to be honest, works is you usually meet more often than just on Sunday. I would spend Wednesdays in church. I would spend the week, That's an incredible reinforcing routine. And if you can get to a point where multiple times a week you are sort of laying the groundwork and making sure that the infrastructure that holds up this negative view of LGBTQ people as a affront to God or living in their sexual perversion, that's an incredible infrastructure. I mean, there is nothing else that competes with a weekly reinforcement of these type of ideas. It requires that type of thing. Unfortunately, sometimes it's used for good. Unfortunately, sometimes it's used to get to a place where you kill 60,000 redheads throughout history. Like, this type of infrastructure can lean in a way that goes bad real fast. And I think right now we're living through a period, unfortunately, like I said, Pat Robertson 10 years ago, as crazy as that guy was, no problem. No problem with the idea that a female soul, more or less, could be born into a male body. That there is nuance there. But we are living through a time, unfortunately, right now.
Walked it back after you
he walked it back. He said, we need to be really careful with this. We got to be careful because he realized he cannot know someone's personal medical history. And to walk around saying a person born the way they are is a freak or an affront to God is wrong. He knew it was wrong. Or he was very up in arms about children being given hormones, until I mentioned the example of, you're a 13-year-old boy, you start to develop breast. What would you do? Are you just going to go with what God made you? Or are you maybe going to, in society, unfortunately, not very accepting? Hopefully we get to a point where no one gives a shit and a kid can just be that. If a kid wants to, fine.
The thing is, like, no one can help how they're born or what they're born with. But when it comes to sexuality, we have choice.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So I get to a point where I have to believe now, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of an evangelical, I have to believe or concede that God will mix me up, so to speak, use this hybrid set of physical representation down here, or perhaps here, where I'm a man, but I have ovaries, right? God has designed me where I'm mixed, right? You can see that we live in a world where that does happen quite frequently enough, where you're talking about millions and millions of people, right?
Sure. Sure.
External markers have been mixed by God if we're going in that direction. Internally, men with no reason have ovaries.
Well, like I said, I don't think it's God doing it. I think it's a result of our fallen, broken world. But go on.
Well, but God doesn't make a mistake with the way we're born.
No, but the part of the issues with birth, like obviously, someone who's born intersex is I would call that a birth defect. If not the birth defect, it would definitely be indication of a fallen, broken world. But I don't think that God's intent or desire was that anyone would have to live like that.
Initially, before the fall.
Exactly. Yeah.
But now it is his intent to bring people into the world with these challenges and to live like that, and sort of, that's fine now.
Well, like I said, I think we have.
Or is it out of control after the fall? I don't know. I'm not sure I know what you're saying.
I'm saying that, like, we're continuing to pay the price for basically flipping God off since the fall.
Okay. Well, because you are on our video together, I just want my 2 cents. I do not subscribe to LGBTQ intersex people. It's not a birth defect. That's my 2 cents. But I understand where you're coming from.
I think that's a result of the fall. I mean, that's
what my pastor said too. That it was a result of the fall. That the thing, cancer, everything is a result of the fall. So,
I mean, it's like, for example, if you and I were a part of a crew on a ship and we decided to commit mutiny, we can't then blame what happens after that as a result of our mutiny. Understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes.
To use an analogy.
I mean, but I don't know. I am trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who says God doesn't make a mistake in the way we are born. Therefore, it's an affront to God when you change the way your sexual identity. I see how the evangelicals sort of set that up as you're turning your back on God by denying how you were born. But I think it just is very strange when you realize that
it's very obvious. If you get early as Genesis 2:24, where God says the intention for human sexuality from God's point of view is one man and one woman in marriage.
Right.
So any deviation from that is considered a rejection of God's standard for your sexuality, and so you can't reject God's standard without rejecting God. So I guess that's true.
Well, I believe Genesis is descriptive, not prescriptive, if I were to be kind about it. But for take that for what it's worth. All that to say is,
you can do the same thing with Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments.
Which one's Exodus 20? Which one's that?
Oh, first, the 10 Commandments. I'm pretty sure those are.
I would say half of them are descriptive. Half of them are descriptive, and we don't listen to the first 5. I mean, they're we don't.
Well, you don't.
Even evangelicals, they don't follow the Sabbath. I mean, Christians work on Sunday. That's part of the 10 Commandments. It's not. We kind of pick and choose which 10 Commandments we prioritize. But I'm going to misremember. I'm going to mispronounce the name. My camera's going to bother me. What is I think it's right before the sermon, if I'm remembering its placement. Is it the Beetle? I am forgetting. I'm going to mix it up with the movie Beetlejuice. Do you know what I'm talking about? The commandments that Jesus lists before the sermon, before the Sermon on the Mount.
Probably.
Oh my God.
The Sermon on the Mount is in Luke and in Matthew. It's Matthew 5-7. That's the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. And Luke, I'm not exactly sure where it is.
Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes are in Matthew 5.
Beatitudes? Okay, thank you. I'm not pronouncing that right. Those, I think, are much more wonderful than the 10 Commandments. And that they should be in front of, those are much more applicable to society, more or less, today. The 10 Commandments, half of them are like, what is this even talking about? But anyways,
Well,
be that as it may.
10 commandments are basically boundaries for human flourishing.
Some of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure you would agree that you don't want your wife to cheat on you. You have a wife.
No, like I said, half of them are like, oh, these are great, these are fine, but the other half are like,
yeah, that seems like a good one.
These are the best 5. Anyways, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I appreciate your time and talking and stuff about this stuff, but I think the one point I was trying to make is, if I were to put myself in the shoes of an evangelical looking at the real world, I have to sort of concede that God has designed a person in this world to have a more complicated set of genetic markers down here, sometimes, or in here, right? Men have ovaries, and sometimes, or women were born without ovaries, even though they should have them. And I'm supposed to believe that God will do that, but not this. And I don't. I think that, yes, in the same way that there are people born with visible intersex markers that take more time to reveal themselves after they hit puberty, I think in the exact same way God has brought people into the world, if I'm subscribing to that ideology, where your brain, your sexual preference, what gives you butterflies when you look a person in the eyes, is not as straightforward as what we would normally apply. I have to believe. It's insane to think that one's fine, that one's fine, that one's not fine. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Of course. And this is, as you've heard you talk about, this exists all throughout the animal kingdom. And I've heard you say, like, oh, you're calling gay people wild animals or something, which
I never called
believe
that.
You didn't, or whatever his name is, Gary. I know it's not his name. I think you said, I'm just going to call him Gary now.
I know his name is Gary. You got to write this
down. It is Gary.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I said Greg once.
Yeah.
I know a Greg. Right. So, this stuff is common all throughout the animal kingdom. There are animals born with this. This is a normal set of genetic deviation that just happens. It's always happened. It will always happen. There will never be a time where 2% of children born every year aren't redheads. There will never be a time where 2% of children aren't born as intersex. It will never stop happening. It never has stopped happening.
But I mean, like, how we compare intersex with LGBT? Like, obviously, like I said, one is a choice and one is not. So, like, you can't choose.
I don't really think it is. I don't really think it is.
You don't think sexual preferences are choices?
That's what I'm talking about. I'm saying if I can see that God will make me a hybrid externally,
you don't even have to act on your sexual impulses. But you have no choice in how you're born. So that's like the thing.
Do you tell yourself when you look at this person, feel butterflies?
No.
Is that like no? You just feel butterflies.
That's right, but you don't have to act on that feeling.
Why wouldn't you? Why would you? Why is that wrong?
You have impulse control, do you not?
Of course, I have impulse control.
Yeah.
Okay, but why would I? That's a feeling of love.
That means you have a choice.
The only reason I would deny the feeling of I feel butterflies when I look at this person, but I shouldn't say that out loud, is because I live in a society that tells me I'm a circus freak if I say that. That's the only reason. That's the only reason it would even cross my mind. Oh, I better keep that on the down low. You're experiencing a feeling of infatuation, of love, of interest, wanting to get to know somebody. You're experiencing what leads to long-term relationships. And I don't understand what's the only reason you would deny that is because you live in a world dangerous to you. In the same way that if you were born with red hair in the 1600s, that was a fucking death sentence. There is no other reason today to hide your red hair. That just isn't needed anymore. Unfortunately, if you are born gay and you realize, shit, when I watch this TV show, I am madly in love with somebody who's the same sex as me. Uh-oh, that's a problem. I've heard my parents comment about how that means I'm fucked up. That I'm turning my back on God. Without that context, there is no reason to think anything you're doing is wrong. And if it was mutual, if they love you back, the only reason that's wrong is because of a societal infrastructure that exists that also paints a target on the back of people born intersex. Kids that take hormones in high school to not develop any physical markers that might make them appear like they are trans.
We can't even say anyone's born gay anyways, because like usually people don't develop sexual interest until like late, I don't know, 11, 12, 13.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, for sure. Kids are running around when they're 4 years old, deeply interested in romantic relationships, but you develop that naturally in the same way that you might be 13 before you start to develop breast. You didn't do anything as a 13-year-old boy to make that change. It is a natural part of the chemicals inside you when you were born that began to roll out at the appropriate times as you develop into an adult. You begin to have romantic interest in other people. You begin to develop.
Socialization plays into that as well.
Yes, it's very dangerous. Yes, I think you have 13 long years to be told you better like the opposite sex or you're in for it. Now, thankfully, we live in a society where that's dying, and there is an uptick in the same way that I'm sure you've seen the graph, left-handedness. The percentage of the population that was left-handed is like 2%, because it used to be the left hand was an indicative marker of the devil, and you would get beat as a child if you use your left hand.
I've never heard this.
If you were left-handed, you were also considered potentially a witch. So it was pretty dangerous to be left-handed.
I'm a lefty, so what do you know?
You're lefty? Well,
I
you would have.
write with my left hand, anyways. But I mean, I'm
You're ambidextrous.
And I was when I was a kid, but I chose my left hand. I don't know why.
Well, you're lucky that you weren't born 1,000 years ago. You would have faced a lot of heat for that, according to the church, not just society, but a religious infrastructure that said you have the left hand of the devil. You're marked by Satan.
Okay. But it's kind of weird because like some sports like hockey and baseball play right-handed. My right, left, I eat with my right hand, so I'm just messed up, I guess.
Well, I think it's an important part of genetic diversity that you can do both, but it's not common. So
no, it's not.
All that to say,
it's kind of laziness. Because I was a lazy kid, so my mom would just kind of do this as an experiment when I was a kid without me even realizing it. It's like one time she said she'd make dinner and she'd put the fork on my right hand, on my right side, and I just pick it up with my right hand. Next time she put it on my left side, I just pick it up with my left hand, like not even realizing what I was doing.
I mean, I wish I could eat with both.
Well, now I can't. Yeah, I can only eat with my right hand now. So, like I said, I just you just choose things, and then just you live with that. I mean,
yeah. Anyways, I lost track of our topic a little bit, but yeah, I think of course there's certain things that begin to reveal themselves in terms of who you are as you grow to a more appropriate age where these things enter your mind. Mm-hmm. Society right now, largely, I grew up in the 80s. So I grew up at a time where
I was born in 81. I don't know about you. But
81 also. I was born in 81. So, I grew up at a time where I remember turning on the TV and asking my parents, what is wrong with these people? Because I was watching violent backlash at pastors that would marry interracial couples. That's not really a thing these days anymore. That's kind of died away. The church has realized that's not really going to fly. So it's not very popular anymore. But I remember that. And I remember now recently, of course, within the last few years, a church that affirms gay couples faces the same type of violent backlash. I think that will die just the same.
In Canada, there are gay couples, gay pastors. Like I said, this is like in Canada. You probably loved if you guys had our gay laws.
I mean, I wish I could live in Canada. Our healthcare system is a freaking disaster. But
yeah, that's true too. You don't have to. It doesn't cost you your mortgage if you have a kidney operation.
Yeah, a lot of stupid stuff here in the States. I cannot stand it. Terrible place to raise a family.
I will say the universal healthcare is the only socialist idea that I really agree with. Because I don't think
Yeah.
you should have to lose your house because you need an operation.
Yeah. It's pretty insane.
Yeah.
So, you made a point about like, well, what impact does society have? And I think you made that in the direction of society is convincing kids that they're gay or trans. I brought up the left-handed. Well, that the impact sort of.
I don't mean that. I'm just saying that
Okay.
I think that socialization definitely kind of makes it makes it very clear, like, if you're even in a Christian community, unfortunately, if you decide to be gay, that you're going to receive a lot of backlash more than likely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, yeah, you and I are coming at it from the same place, because I thought you meant it in terms of.
No.
I hear a lot of times Christians say you're encouraging kids to be like, "Oh, I'm gay," which usually I respond to that with like, "So what?" Like, so you have like you are in the 9th grade and you have like a boyfriend as a boy for like 2 months, and you're like, "That's not really for me." Like, what is that? To me, I'm like, I don't really. What does it matter? I had relationships when I was in middle school. They didn't matter. I mean, they were always with girls, but I'm saying if it was more acceptable, what is the harm? Anyways.
I have one openly gay cousin, and I've tried to have a conversation with him one time on Facebook, which I realize now is not the greatest medium to have these kind of conversations. And I asked him point blank, like, you never just look at a woman and just think, wow, she's beautiful. And she's like, yeah, I don't think Facebook is the kind of place for this topic. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And I'd love to have this conversation with him in person, because, like, I mean,
is it to talk him out of being? Is it to talk him out of it?
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay. No, just to hear him out. Because because like as a straight man, I just can't understand looking at a beautiful woman and doesn't do anything. I don't understand how that doesn't work, right? But I mean, I'm not him.
Well, it sounds. The other thing is, I think you're very close. I think you're very close to something there. How to deny that about yourself? What would that mean for you? Like we started this conversation off about killing certain parts of ourselves. If you had to kill that part of yourself, could you?
Well, that's the question. It goes back to the premise of this conversation, which I said to begin with, was the first call of the gospel is deny yourself.
Could you do that?
That's the thing that most people don't want to do.
No,
I would. I have. I mean,
you're
I'm not a gay
considering
person, obviously, but I mean.
No, I'm not saying you're going to be attracted to the same sex, but I'm saying, are you committing to living as Paul recommended, not in a relationship, never being romantically involved with anyone, never having a family?
Paul also said it's better to marry than burn with passion.
Yes, I remember. If you can't control it, to get married. Yes. Yeah. But he said both. Are you I believe I've heard you say you'd like to have a family and start a family.
Yeah, I would.
It's a very difficult thing to kill, that part of yourself. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't deny myself starting a family. That gives me purpose. It's the happiest thing I have in my life is my family. To kill that part, if a religion asked me to kill that part of myself, I wouldn't. That's not a religion worth having.
Well, the thing is that I agree, but I mean, I also think that it wasn't. I think that's a bit of an opinion of Paul's. I mean, and he just thought it's better to stay single because then your attention isn't diverted, right? And he compared himself to Peter, and Peter has a family now. Nothing wrong with having a family, and Paul never condemned Peter for having one, but he just said it's more taxing in ministry. That's where Paul was going. Like, if you have a family, it's harder to have a ministry because you have to consider your wife and your kids. You can't, like, as a single man, I can just get up and do whatever the heck I want, right? Like, if I'm married, I have to say, hey, honey, like, for example, I'm hosting a poker at my apartment later tonight. And if I have a wife, I'd have to say, hey, honey, like, I'm thinking about having the guys over for poker. Are you okay with that? Just out of respect, right? But as a single man, I don't have that. I can just do a poker night, and I have no wife to say, hey, honey, I'm thinking about having a poker night with the guys. Like, you don't have to run that by. And so and that's the kind of idea that Paul was referencing to it's better not to marry because, well, I don't have to say, hey, honey, I'm going to go to Athens today and preach. Are you okay with that? Like, because he was single, he could just get up and go to Athens, right?
I think he also was making a point about the end times were near, and so there was not reason to start a family. Also, I believe that was part of it, which he was a little off about the date. But
well, that's the thing is, and it had to do with the words of Jesus himself, which says, "I'm coming back soon." Now, as we know, soon to human beings and soon to God are definitely not one and the same, because here we are, 2024, the year of our Lord.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a conversation for a different date, but I don't think Paul was aware of that. We've talked about that.
I think most disciples lived with the idea that Jesus was going to come back within their lifetimes because of, like I just said, the difference in God's idea of soon and our idea of soon. I mean, you probably have read I'm assuming you've read the book, The Chronicles of Narnia, all of them, right? Or heard them at some point.
Well, I've seen the movie and I've heard of them, obviously, but yeah.
Okay, so there's a line in I love the use of that kind of what's it called? I'm trying to think of the genre. There's fantasy, but it's also it's like an archetype, not metaphor, something else. But anyways, there's a line where Lucy and Aslan are having the talks, and Lucy's always, because she's a child, she has the childlike faith. And they're having a conversation. He and Aslan are having this conversation, and just before Aslan's about to go because he's got something else to do, Lucy's like, "When will I see you again?" He's like, "You'll see me soon." And then he says something like, "With let's bring this up." He says, "Well, what do you mean by soon?" And then Aslan's like, "All time is soon with me."
That's a good line.
It's kind of a frustrating response for a child, I'm sure. I mean,
yeah,
but I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, it's like, that's what I mean about bringing this back into this conversation about Jesus telling his disciples, "I'm returning soon," but here we are, 2024, year of our Lord, and Jesus still hasn't returned. So obviously, guys, has said 2,000 years is not soon to any human being because it's longer than any human being lives. But soon in the minds of the disciples, I think that's kind of one of the things that probably spurred the way they lived, is they thought, okay, Jesus coming back soon. That could be any day. Mm-hmm. So we're going to live like Jesus coming back any day. And they did. Yeah. And it radically changed the New Year's world during that time.
No, I mean, I'd certainly.
If you live like Jesus.
I think that's appropriate. That probably did many of them did hope and believe that it would be very soon in their lifetime. I don't think there's anything controversial about that statement. Anyways, we've been talking for an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too long. I think we've talked about everything I hoped to talk about. I hope there's something here for someone watching again to think about with the way that some of these things are discussed online. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk about them.
Yeah, for sure. And my approach is like, I'm not trying to get to, well, I mean, if people change their mind, so be it. But I mean, just to have, like you said, have the conversations are important to have. And also just to get people to think. I think that's what we both want, just get people thinking.
Yes. I think some people say things without thinking through the implications of how it could impact somebody in a different perspective. And I think that can be dangerous.
All right, Mike, I'm going to end and record now, but thanks for your time.
No, thanks for having me.